Hi, I'm Harm Girding, and this video is going to go through Keystone connectors, mostly Cat5e and Cat6 Keystone connectors, but I will discuss some of the other combinations. We will wire one, and I will show you how to test it and how to look at it to see if it's error-free. With Keystone connectors, there's several different types out there for different purposes, and you have to have obviously the right one for what you're doing. So I've got several here to show you. And this particular one is a coax one, and it also will mount in a wall plate, right? And it is still considered a keystone connector when we're doing it. I also have a blank keystone, so if you have a wall plate or something and it has an extra port that's unavailable, we have blanks for it as well. And then we have a bunch of different styles from different manufacturers. So nice, you see a Leviton one. I'm not actually sure which brand this is, probably could be Leviton, but anyway, they're all just a little bit different, and they're not necessarily compatible from a fitting point of view. So if you have a wall plate, some wall plates manufacturers are the same in sizing, and some are proprietary, so you do have to watch it. And I would recommend that if you have a specific brand that you use, that you consistently use that brand everywhere you go, so that all the connectors that you have are the same, the color codes are the same, the wiring, the method you do it are the same, everything is the same when you're actually doing it. All right, so with our keystone connectors, first thing that we need is wire. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about wire and things to watch for with wire. So with my wire, I have a box of wire, and I've pulled out some samples, and this could be Cat5e or Cat6. In this case it's Cat5e. Now it's a specific brand, but I'm not really as much brand specific as I like to say whatever brand works for you. However, sometimes you get what you pay for. So a cheaper brand, sometimes the quality of the cable isn't as good. So when you're pulling lots of runs in a building, right, cable may not be your major cost, labor may be your major cost, and when you're doing that, you want to make sure that you're consistent with what you're doing. The next thing is there's writing on these cables, and the writing on them will be things like distance or actual potentially temperature rating. This is a Cat6 cable. There's only 72 feet left in the box. These are all things in here, and then there's some numbers after that. But basically, all cables have labels, and you got to make sure you have the appropriate cable for the job. And when I say you have to have the appropriate cable for the job, if, for example, I have shielded cable, then I must actually use a shielded connector. And if you actually were to look at this, you'd actually see metal shielding. For this particular video, I'm not going to actually install the shielded one. I'm actually only going to do the non-shielded connector. So unshielded cable is the right cable to use. If you do have shielded cable, then you cannot use unshielded connectors, because your shielded cable actually becomes a antenna, which can actually pick up noise like radio frequencies and other noise, and it may actually make your signal worse. The idea that shielded cable is always better is probably not correct. Shielded cable would always be better if everybody perfectly installed it. But if at some point in the line somebody makes a mistake in that installation, shielded cable is often worse. So I would recommend that if you just need unshielded twisted pair, or unshielded cable, that is what you actually would use. So the next thing is that when you look at this cable, how do we actually cut it, strip it, and things like that? So I have several tools here. I have a lineman plier, which if you're an electrician, you probably have one of these. I have a side cutter, which is actually one of the main tools that I use to actually cut these. If you are an electronics guy, you may have these baby ones, which are just side cutters. Probably not the most common tool, but definitely acceptable to use. The only thing you have to watch for with tools like this is that you don't cut too heavy a cable, because if you cut too heavy a cable, what will happen is the actual cable will damage the actual cutters. right? So the cutters are designed for a tool. And then I also have electrician's scissors for that, and I use those, and you can actually use those to strip the cable as well. This requires a little bit of skill, but often telephone guys use these, at least in our neck of the woods. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip the cable. Now I have actually a stripper here that's designed for doing Ethernet cable, or sorry, Cat5 cable, and it's actually, this particular one is actually adjusted wrong on purpose. This one's going to cut too deep, and I'm going to show you what happens when it cuts too deep. So when you actually get a tool like this, you're going to find that the amount of the thickness of the insulation and how it cuts is different. So if you switch brands, you have to adjust your tool every time. If you don't adjust your tool every time, you risk actually cutting too deeply, or at some point it doesn't cut deeply enough, and then people use a knife or other things to make it work. And so I'm going to take my stripping tool and I'm going to go once around. And remember, this is actually cutting too deep, right? So when I do it, I pull it off, and if you look, you'll see that it actually cut right through the insulation everywhere, right? It is for sure all the way through. And so I'm going to pull that back a little bit, and I'm going to actually bend this, and I'm going to overbend it. Now, I'm not planning on using this, so I'm just doing this for illustration purposes. But if you look here, you'll see that the copper actually will show through. Maybe it's very hard to see maybe on the video, but right where my thumbnail is, I can actually see copper there, and there as well. And that's just from cutting too deeply. Now, what happens is when you have copper, if you notch it or nick it, then it will actually cleave at that point. So if you put a bit of pressure on it, then the copper will often break right at that point. So if you make a mistake with cutting too deeply, that damage may catch up to you, but it may not catch up to you right away. In fact, we've had cables where when you insert them, they work fine, and then someone touches it and it stops working, and someone touches it again and it starts working. And those are the things that you get when people improperly terminate them or maybe improperly strip them. So in this case, it's stripping it. So I pull off a section and I see a piece of string here, right? And with this string, what I'm going to do is, normally I would cut it off, but I'm going to actually show you what I can use that for. Now in this cable, if I just pull on the spring may come actually right out. Actually, it's pulling not too bad right now. So normally what I do on a short section like this, to show you, I normally put a knot in the end. But here, I'm just going to do this. You may find with your side cutters, you put a little notch to get you started. But this, strain relief and or for stripping, I can actually use this and pull the cable right back. And I've actually just suddenly stripped a whole bunch of cable here. And you can see the insulation just comes right off because, of course, the string pulled right through it. And at this point, if I didn't have the proper tools, or I was afraid I was going to nick it, I could actually take a tool like my lineman pliers and I can cut that insulation right off. There we go. And I have it there. So I've actually made that work. Now, having said that, I personally, on my sites, wouldn't accept that because it's very messy. It's not a nice, round, neat connection. But in an emergency, it'll work, right? So when I'm doing it, you'll see it's notched there a little bit. Maybe I cut it back a little bit more, but it's never going to be straight if I cut it that way. It's just not possible to do that very nicely. And the stripping tool will do a much nicer job of actually finishing it when it does it. So that's what this string is for. And so when I'm done with it, I would just cut it off and do it. So in this case, I'm just going to cut my cable right through and just use my lineman pliers again. Cut through, and there we go. I'm ready to go again. And this time I'm going to grab the other stripping tool, and I'm actually going to use that to cut it through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to strip the cable, and I'll peel it, and you'll notice that when I did it, it actually didn't cut all the way through, which is good. That's exactly what I'm looking for. If it cuts all the way through, it's more likely to nick. So I have that done. So now I'm going to pull that off, and I'm good to go there. And so at this point, I'm going to cut the string off because I've already shown you how to strip the wire with the string in it. And I've got wires here, and this is where I would this is where you have a color chart. You can look it up on the internet, and you can actually look to see kind of what the color codes are. And you know, the question is, you need to know what the color codes are. And I say it's very handy because when I'm using my tester, the tester is actually going to use those color codes. So if I have connectors here, the color code's different. So I'm not using these color code to actually figure out what to do on the connector. I actually look at the connectors to specifically do that. So on here, I want to know what the color codes is, because when I'm testing, it means something. So first, let's talk about the color code. So it's T568A and B. You can choose which one to use. A is recommended, and they actually suggest that you use A, and then if A is not going to work for you, then the alternate is B. There's no quality difference between the two. In fact, a crossover cable is A on one side, B on the other. So what I'm going to do with this is, you'd say white, green, green, that's A starting. If you see it start with orange, it's generally a B start. So you'll have to know which color code you're using. I recommend people don't memorize both color codes. I recommend you memorize the A color code, and then you remember that B is flipped. So green, the A color code is white, green, green, white, orange, 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 white, brown, brown. So that's the actual color code. Now if you go to the B color code, it's actually white, orange, orange, white, green, blue, white, blue, green, white, brown, brown. And does it matter? Well, again, you look at the connector, you say, well, you know, this connector, I have to wire it to that color code, so why would I need to know that? And so when you put it in a tester, what that will do is it'll make it so you can tell that pin 1 is pin 1, pin 2 is pin 2, right? So for example, if it's pin 2 and it's an A color code, I know that it's the green, solid green wire, right? The next white, orange is actually the third wire, so pin 3 is the third wire. So if your tester, when you're running it, comes up and says the third pin is broken, we know we're looking at white, orange. So knowing that color code, even though you don't use it to actually wire it right on the connector, is actually very handy. So the next thing I'm going to do is we're actually going to set the wires up to actually work with one of these connectors. Now if you look, if you were to look carefully, you would see that these color codes are not actually quite in the same order. And what I need to do is I need to actually wire this based on the color code of these connectors. And in the connector I'm going to use, I'm just going to put the other two away here. You'll see that in the center it's white, brown, brown, there's a white, orange, orange, and that's the outside colors. Now if I look more closely, I'll see that the two inside colors are the A color code, and the two outside colors are the B color code. So on the outside here and on the outside here, that is actually the B color code, and the other side is the A color code on the inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over, or rotate it actually, and hold it so the brown is on my left side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go brown, white, brown. Whichever color is the majority color is the way you say it. So if white is the majority color, so for example, you're looking at the cable here, and we're looking at it and we say, okay, I have blue with white blue, and the white blue has just got a little blue strip on it, or it's got a collar around it with blue, then that's the white color first, right? So that's white, blue, blue. That's how you say it. If this was solid blue with white strips, it would actually be blue, white. So just so you know how to kind of read the colors. So I need, for the connector, as I'm holding it, brown, white, brown, right? And then green, white, green. And then on the other side, starting at the top, it's white, blue, blue, white, orange, orange. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to lay my wires out in that order. So I've got the wires here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually put them in kind of the roughly the right spot. And you know, you kind of lay it out that way. So let's say I do it this way, and I strip it, and I'm going to say, okay, white, orange, and I'm going to get these wires nicely laid out. And you go, okay, he's doing it. Now notice that the end of my wires are still together. That just makes it a little bit easier to work with. And what I like to do is I actually like to put a little crank in here. So what I do is I put a bend in here, and I'm going to turn it. Now somebody's going to say, hey, you're not supposed to put a bend in the wire. And you're absolutely right, except for that part's being cut off. So we're not keeping that part. So I'm not actually damaging the wire, right? So I turn it, and I've kind of laid out, And what I'm doing now is I'm actually going to turn this around, and I've got a brown, white, green, white, green, and then I've got the blue and the orange. Now I'm going to go back to my connector and go, oh, wait a minute, I mixed up the blue and the orange. So it's always recommended that you check, because if you haven't done it for a while, you may make a mistake when you're actually doing it. So I've got the wires laid out in that order, and now you're going to go, hey, you laid it out, but it's difficult to actually, you know, how do you actually lay this right on top the way you laid it? And I find it actually very difficult to wire from the top, and a lot of people have trouble with it, so it makes it much harder. So we actually wire from the side. So I lay it in from the side and put that in place, and that's actually how I've laid the wire out, just to make it easy to do that. Now some people will wire this and then they'll flip it around to do the other side. So you may find people doing that. So whatever works for you to get it in there, but the blue is somewhere in the insulation is somewhere in the middle, and what I'm doing is I'm just pulling it through, and I pulled it through into the connector. I got my thumb on the inside. Now some people's thumbs are so big they don't fit on the inside, but you can see I've kind of got it laid out there, and in fact it's already kind of holding onto the wire. So I've tried to make it a little bit easier. Then I'm going to do the other side, and you know, just lay the orange in. Now you got to make sure that you kind of double check yourself, because it'll save you a lot of work later. It really sucks when you actually test this, mount it into the wall, and then after you mount it into the wall, you realize that you messed the connector up, because you have to take it all apart, pull it out, test it, redo it, put it back in. So I actually, now that I've finished wiring it and pulling it in place, I actually double check my colors to make sure that they're correct. Now if you do a lot of these, you may not need to do that, but I always recommend that people go back and verify or check their colors, just because that will you know, give you a higher success rate when you're doing it, because you'll be thinking about what you're going to pick up on the way home, and you'll get it wrong, right? Because you'll be thinking about supper, and instead you wire the connector upside down. Again, always hold the connector the same way. In my case, I'm holding the brown in the bottom left corner, and I always hold it that way, so the chances of wiring it badly are less. So now what I need to do is I'm going to have to punch it down. So I have a punch down tool here, and if you actually look at the punch down tool, the cutting blade is on the yellow side. So if you look there, I'm trying to point at it, that is the cutting blade right where my fingernail is, and that will actually slide along the connector and it will cut it. So when you're terminating it, I want yellow on the outside, and when I go to the other side, I'm going to go flip it, and you'll see my tool flip, and yellow will be on the outside. Now when you're doing that, you can say, oh, I'm going to hold it in my hand, and I got the tool here, and what do you think is going to happen if I'm a little tired, I'm not holding it quite right, or I didn't get my punch quite straight? I'm going to slip, and my punch can actually go right into my hand. So we have to have some way of protecting ourselves. Now we could wear, I guess, the right gloves or things, but we also have some choice. Sometimes they're palm tools, wiring assistant, or some people call them a puck. I sometimes call it a puck. And instead of holding it this way, I'm going to use one of these tools to actually hold the connector, so that if I slip, it actually will catch in the lip here. So I'm much less likely to injure myself when I'm doing it. Now other people will say, oh, that's just an extra tool I need. So I can, some people will put this against the wall when they do it, and it'll leave a square impression on the wall. So to me, that's unacceptable. And if you may be asked to actually fix that wall or repair that wall if you do that. So I would recommend you avoid doing that. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a puck. Now I got, or a wire assistant or palm tool, and I've got two different styles here. I've got an ICC one and a Tyco amp one here, and I've actually got 2 or 3 others as well. So different brands have different ones. These ones are somewhat interchangeable. In this one, what I do is I take my connector and I literally just snap the connector in and it will actually, I can actually do it from there. Actually, I'm kind of holding it upside down and then doing it, but there we go, it's snapped into the connector. And again, when I do this and I'm actually doing my punch down, I'm actually able to basically connect and terminate, and I'm protecting my hands with that. And it also gives you a bit more leverage, because you can now go, instead of having to hold your fingers in a funny position, I can now basically just put the force into it, right? But my chances of going through my hand are very slim, versus if I'm trying to hold it, it's more awkward, right? Because if you're holding a connector like this and you're trying to punch it down, you know, it's actually a little bit harder to do. The other thing I found is, instead of holding it on the punch tool this way, I find it works better if I actually put the back of my hand and I'm kind of using the mechanical force to push it in, because then I'm not using a lot of finger strength to do it. I'm basically just using my palm to push into the connector. So, you know, all those things make it a little bit easier to actually do it. And so I got it in the holder, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to slide it in, and I'm going to punch it, and it'll make a punching sound, and it cut the wire. So let me do this one side here. Now, not all of these tools cut very well. Some of them don't cut, and if you find that you're not holding it at quite the right angle, you may find it doesn't cut as well. So you try to line up as straight as possible when you're actually doing the cut. So I have another tool here, and this is actually my favorite one, people will hold this one up and say, well, that's a Bix. Well, take a look at this one. It's the black Bix, and notice the connector is different. This is actually a 110 Belden style, or it used to be a Nortel one, tool, very much like the Bix, and it actually cuts across. So, and I like holding this one, and it actually fits in my tool pouch a little better. And so the black side is out, that's the cutting side. So as I put it through, it will cut, and it will effectively do the same thing. And you know, the wires, well, this one didn't fall off, but you know, it does it. If you have one where the wire doesn't fall off, maybe it wasn't quite straight, then you know, you can probably do it again. So if you look at this, you'll notice my wires, that they're all nicely in the back, right? And I can now remove it from the tool. I just kind of squished in there with my thumb and pulled it out of the palm tool, or the wiring assistant. And what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take my strain relief piece, and I'm going to put this on. Now, I'm going to slide this on the cable. I can put it on after the fact. I'm going to actually, as I go, I'm going to rotate it up, and I'm going to slide it in. So now, this is now slid in on the connector, and it's finished, right? Like it's ready to go. I can use these. This style here is known as an SL110. I can put a modular end on this side, but let me quickly do this so that you get a second view on me actually doing it. So first step, strip the wire, right? And be generous with yourself. Give yourself enough room to work. Bend it, you'll notice that insulation, boom, get it off there. Pull down on the string, take my side cutters, cut the string because I don't need it for this style of connector. Then lay my wire out, so brown, green, and then orange, blue. Now if you see me doing it the other way around, I'm flipping the orange and the blue. We have another style of connector which is flipped that way, so habits die hard when it comes to this. So I'm just going to quickly untwist it. You see me kind of getting the wires in place, and again I put that little crank in there just so I don't hurt my fingertips too much, right? Get that. Laid out. And you'll notice that I don't actually pull the wire apart. And I got partly into that habit is because we have run across wire where the white wire is only white. And if it's only white, if you get them falling apart and you mix them up, then you'll have a cross-wired connector. So these are still together, so I know for sure that those were that way. I then take my connector, and what I told you before is I always hold brown in the bottom left-hand corner. So that's where I'm going to put it. Lay it in the center, right? Pull my wire over, right? Get her into the actual groove. Pull it down. Pull the green down. And this time I didn't mix up the blue and the orange. Alright, so they're in there and I'm now ready to punch it, so I'm going to use the other palm tool slash puck. Grab this. Just grab my punch. This is the most common one. The wires just fell off, and I'm going to do this one as well. And again, you notice I'm putting it on the palm, and so it's much easier for me to kind of just squeeze together and get that cut to go, and you'll see the wires just cutting very neatly. I'll just change the orientation a bit. Again, yellow is out, it's the cut side. I'm going to rotate it on, and I'm actually going to take the tool away and slide her in. Alright, so I've got both connectors on. So the next step after doing this, and I look at it, and once you've put the protection on, you look around and you see, did any of the wires pull out, right? Does it actually look kind of proper when it's actually doing it? Is it kind of look good? And I think at the end of the day this looks pretty good to me. So I have these connectors that we just did, and what I need to do is test them. So I have some testing tools for it. I have an entry-level tester right here, just a basic mapper. I have a slightly better version, I'd say maybe a mid-grade one right here, and after that there's many tools. And in fact, the tools go right up to what they call certification testers. Certification testers is what you would use if you did a large job and you wanted to provide stats to the client for that. And it would, this is an older one that we just happen to have lying around as a tester, and this would, you'd enter it on here, it would memorize all the transactions, you would export them to a spreadsheet or the like, and then you would print that out and provide those numbers to a client. So for what we're doing right here, I'm just actually going to show you the two simple testers that work. And there's many of these testers out there. A tester like this can be had for under $100 versus, you know, maybe $300 or $400 for a slightly fancier tester. So let me start with the basic one. Now, in order to test a connection like this, we see a little problem actually connecting them. So I've got some patch cables here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the patch cable out and put it in, and I've got the base unit here, so I pulled it out so you could see that I could actually have it plugged into a wall. And so this faceplate's in a wall. Now when you're testing this, you need to test it in its final position. So if you test it while the wall plate's not on, you have to test it again when the wall plate's on, because putting it in the wall, the pressure of doing that, especially if the box is full, that can actually cause the connector to fail. So you want to make sure that it's final. So if it's in a wall plate like this mounted on a wall, it's final, it's finished. Then what we're going to do is I'm going to hook another patch cable. I've got another patch cable right here and still got the wrappings on it, and hook that up, put it into my tester, and at this point I'm going to turn the tester on. So on, and on this particular tester I've got voice, video, or data, and I'm just going to hit the data button, and it's going to go through, and it does it very quickly. A certification tester will never be that quick. So it's pass, and then it says 1, 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, all the way across to the end, and that indicates that all those are correct. Now, if let's say 1 was lined up with 3, what would that tell you? Well, what's at pin 1? Well, I gave you the green color code earlier, or the A color code, and if we've wired this A, then if I see white green is pin 1. So pin 1 is white green. If that's mixed up with pin 3, well, pin 3 is white orange. So maybe it's something as simple as you wired it A on one end and B on the other, and that would give you a crossover. Now, in the wall, you're always supposed to really do straight through. Adaptations are supposed to be done outside the wall. It doesn't mean you can't do them in the wall, but if you're doing it properly, you wouldn't have them in there because it really makes it hard to troubleshoot. Wiring's going to be in your building for 10 to 20 years. And what's going to happen is 10 years from now, nobody will know that you made this special change for this piece of hardware that no longer even exists. So it's recommended that any changes you do are done outside the wall. So got that. So let me disconnect this tester and disconnect it from the end. So put my base unit away, and there we go. Pull out tester number 2, which is a slightly fancier version. It also has a base. For this particular one, I also have units with numbers on them. So little plugs, you can plug them in and it'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So you can actually identify them, and it will identify those numbers when you're doing it. So when you plug in, it'll actually say on the screen you're plugged in number 5. So then you can actually figure out which one that you did. So let me just plug this in. So first, plug in the remote. This will be at the far end, right? Usually in the, I'll say in the hallway or the room that you're wired going to. And then this one right here, I will plug into the top of the tester. And usually when you're testing, let's say your server room or wiring closet, that's where you would have the fancier unit. And I'm just going to turn it on, so it's going to, on it goes. It takes a moment to start up. Give it a moment. So it's on data, and I'm going to scroll down until I'm on cable test. So you can see maybe the cable test is flashing. I'm on cable test, and then I'm just going to hit the OK button. And it's got a little hammer going. It's doing some testing. It said pass, and it actually gives me a distance. Notice it says 8 feet there. So 3 foot, 3 foot, 2 foot. That's probably about right, eh? So that's probably about 8 feet. So it'll actually test that. When you have a tester like this, always hit exit and then OK again before you do the next test. So don't actually keep the test running completely, because it can give you weird results depending on the tester. Now, if I actually take this tester and run it, and it gives me different results each time, that could indicate that you have a low battery. So let's say it goes fail, pass, fail, and you're looking at it, or it says pin 1 and 18 are mixed up. I'm just joking about the 18 part, see if you're paying attention. But basically when pin 1 and 8 and 3 and 4 and all these kind of different numbers are mixed up, chances are your battery's low, right? So at some point, before you start rewiring everything and get really frustrated, maybe just change the batteries and make sure the batteries are fresh on your tester. So I'm just going to turn that off, and that is actually finished testing on my cable. And at this point we would be done. And again, that test only happened when I actually had it closed up in the wall, finalized on the patch panel, wherever it may be. Now, when you're doing wiring like this, you may mount them in different things. So if it's mounted in the wall in a standard wall box or in a double with a drywall ring, then you have a plate like this that the connector is going to snap into. If you actually look at the back of this one, it actually has the word up on it, right? So don't mount these upside down. It looks funny. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my connector and I'm going to say, okay, I'll put it in, and it only snaps in one way, right? If you try to put it in upside down, it just won't snap in. It just doesn't fit. So when you're looking at it, this is up. So in a normal connector, when it's up, the wires are up, not down. Now, what's the advantage of having the wires up? The advantage of having the wires up is if the wires are up, that means that there's no dust gathering on them, or less dust gathering on them. So it protects them to some degree. So anyway, it's in there. That's all we need to do. I'll pull it out. If I use enough force, I can get it out. Or what I do is I take a small flat tip screwdriver, I bend it a little bit, and it just pops right out. I can also mount these in a surface mount box, right, with 1, 2, 3, 4 connections on it. So if I just have a couple connections in a spot, I can do it that way. Now, let's say that you were bringing this to a server room. I can do that as well, and I may end up with a patch panel, right? And with the patch panel, you know, you have something like this mounted on the wall, and then this will just, you know, snap into it, and it will give it to you as well. So there we go. So you can see right there that it's actually in there. And so I like these the best. So kind of open patch panels, get all blanks, no spots in them. What you do is you just put normal ends on it, put the same end that you do on both sides, and you get them in place, and it's easier to do, right? Then we put our labels on and everything else. Don't ever forget to label it. And by the way, final labeling, pen handwriting is not considered sufficient. It must come out of a label printer or some kind of printer for doing it, just because not everybody can read your writing, right? Even if you think it's perfect. All right, so I'm going to pull this out of this connector. Now, what happens if I don't have one of these? There's a couple different types of patch panel around. This one right here is a wall mount one, right? Great for a residence. It's 12 ports. You screw this to the wall. This just snaps in place. The wire comes in between here to these connectors. Now, when you look at these connectors and have them in place, you will see that all of it is on one side. So if you look at the pin numbers, I would actually wire this white, orange, brown, and on this side I would go white, green, blue. So you would have this. So that this, what I'm holding my thumb to, would be connector number 12. When I'm holding my thumb to right here, this is connector number 1. So I can actually just wire it right in, and I'll just quickly do one just to show you how that works, but I'm going to actually do it on the hard one, this one right here. And the differences on this one is that you'll notice that blue is up in all the positions, so it's blue, blue, and then it's white, green. And so what this is the top row will be your A color code. So it'll be white, blue, white, blue, blue, and then white, green, green, white, orange, orange, white, brown, brown is actually what it is on this patch panel. And we'll wire one in here quickly to do it. And this is, I would consider this older style. They still sell them, but I prefer to use the other style. I find, especially if you're adding to a wiring system, it's much easier to use the other style of patch panel. So I'm just going to grab a bit of wire, cut that off, right? Quickly make sure I don't use the one where it's set extra deep. Cut through, nice, right? Nice quick strip there. Cut the wire off, or the, sorry, not the wire, the string off. Do that. And I'm going to lay it out. So I'm going to lay it out as, and it's going to be white, blue, blue. And then I'm going to, the next one is actually white, green, then white, orange. So let me just get that in place. White, green. Get my wires. It takes a moment to do this nicely, right? And if you watch, I kind of made sure that all my whites are in the bottom. If I look at the color code inside of this patch panel, you notice that it's actually the white, the stripes, right? The white colors first. So it's white, blue, blue, white, green, green. So I'm just going to lay it in here. And again, I start in the middle. So I'll lay this somewhere in the middle, and I'll put that in place. Now, if you get a Cat6 version of one of these, it'll be tighter. So Cat5 ones are a little bit looser. There's a bit more play in what you're allowed to do. Make sure I don't mix the wires up. It's actually a little bit easier if this is actually mounted in a patch panel to begin with. So I got it, kind of looking at the colors, just I have it upside down just because it's a little bit easier to hold that way to show you. White, blue, blue, white, green, green, and then white, orange, orange, white, brown, brown. Now somebody go, hey, you mixed the orange and the green up. It's if you look carefully, the bottom side here, where my thumb is, that's the A side, and the other side is the B side. So it actually is correct. And this one, of course, it would be mounted in a patch panel, so I could just punch it, but I'll just hold it here and punch it down. So now someone is going to ask me, so these will just break off. Someone's going to ask me, when you're actually doing this, is it okay, like, you know, you just used a patch panel for your sample, you know, are you going to sell this to a client? And this is actually one I pulled out of a client site, so I actually brought it here just for a sample so I could actually show you guys. But as a normal rule of thumb, I do not consider these reusable. Now, when I actually do wiring at a site and I mess up a connector, I'll fix it. But I'm not going to pull 200 connectors out of a site and then sell another client 200 used connectors. It's not really worth the while. The connectors aren't the big part of the cost, and you know, it's not really what I would do. So this is done. So that's how you would actually do the same thing on a patch panel. If you enjoy the technical information in this video, please feel free to join my YouTube channel, Security with Harm. Thank you for watching.